Everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 10-game Major League Baseball slate. There are some weather issues in this slate, potentially just rain, not too many, no games that look like they're going to get suspended, but could have some delays. Before I get started, though, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really does help the channel a lot. With that said, I do have some core plays here. Yasmani Grandal, Tim Anderson, and Jake Fraley. I'll get into those when I get in those positions. But with that said, let's get into our pitchers here first, and I'm just going to do it this way here. So I've got 4 P1 pitchers here in Eovaldi, Ryan, Senga, and Alcantara. Now I like Eovaldi, Ryan, and Alcantara the best, where Senga's kind of a Hail Mary option with his facing Toronto. I think Ryan and Alcantara are probably the best two overall, with Alcantara having the best matchup, and Ryan having a tougher matchup against Cleveland with a low K rate there. But overall, he definitely those 4 guys are definitely my top options for the first pitcher position. So for P2 options, I like Bradley, Kopech, McKenzie, and Lively. Lively is definitely risky due to the fact he's at home, but that's why he's a Hail Mary call. And then Kopech, McKenzie, and Bradley all have interesting matchups, with Bradley having the toughest one, but Kopech and McKenzie have decent matchups against bad teams that have good strikeout potential. So with that said, let's get into our catchers. Now I'm going to start with Yasmani Grandal here. He is not actually projected to start today, which honestly I hope he does draw the start, because he has absolutely great metrics here, and if he does, then he'll become a must play for me, especially at his price. Moving into Perez for Kansas City. Now he has the best metrics overall as a catcher. Obviously, he's hit the ball pretty well this season. He has home run potential, but he definitely pretty pricey today, and it's going to be somewhat hard to roster on this particular matchup. His metrics there are very good, and then William Contreras for Milwaukee also draws a really nice upside in this matchup, and he hit a home run in his last game. And he's been hitting the ball pretty good lately, so I do think he draws some really nice matchup metrics here as well. And he definitely has a great upside here, being the fact that this game's in Cincinnati. As such, this catching position doesn't have a ton of value. Possibly someone who's not projected to start will likely draw a start today, giving us another great option, for this slate. But overall, there's not a ton to love at this position. But you could also consider JT Realmuto, Matt Thaiss, and then obviously Yasmani Grandal, who is at this position. Then we'll look at our first baseman, and we're going to start with Pete Alonso. Now, Pete has some really good upside in this matchup, and he's got home run potential every time up. He has been a little bit slumpy lately, which is a concern, but he definitely has good metrics for this matchup, and it's a very good matchup indeed. Then we'll look at Talese for Milwaukee. Now, he draws a nice matchup here against Lively, who's at home in Cincinnati, and this definitely gives him some utility, as he has some really good upside when he has home runs. His price has come up quite a bit, though, since where it was, and that definitely makes him harder to roster today, but he definitely has good home run potential in this matchup. Pasquanto has been up and down throughout the season, and he has been a little bit of a slump lately, but he definitely has home run potential in this matchup, and he has a very favorable matchup in general, so I really like his metrics here, and I think he has home run potential. Then we'll look at Andrew Vaughn, and if you go with Chicago White Sox stack, then he's definitely in play, as he has had some really good games lately. He has home run potential, and they draw a nice favorable matchup. And then finally, Joey Menendez for Washington. He also draws a good matchup here. He hasn't hit the home runs this season that we expected, but he is a good value option, especially if you go up with some Washington stack. The Washington players, really, you only want to mess with the right-handed hitters, though, today, so to keep that in mind. You could, as for this position, there's a lot of good options. A very deep position, probably the deepest on the slate by a lot. I definitely think whichever team you're going to go with the main stack is probably the guy you should go with. So if you go with a White Sox stack, then go with Vaughn. If you go with a Washington stack, Menendez, Milwaukee stack, Talese. Yeah, that's kind of how I'm looking. But you could also consider Ohtani, Vlad Jr., Brandon Belt, Yandy Diaz, Justin Turner, Jared Walsh, and Nate Lowe. Those guys are all in play today at this position. Maybe in the second base, Marcus Semien here is in play for Texas. Now he draws a really good good matchup metrics here for this matchup. He is fairly expensive, obviously, at $6,000, which definitely makes him hard to face here. But he does draw a little bit of a tough matchup, but I do think he's got good metrics here, and he has nice upside as a result. Polanco is a much better option just because his price is so much cheaper. He's got similar metrics to Simeon, and though his situation is a little bit riskier against also a decent pitcher. So I do think both those guys are in play, but there are high risk, high reward. Overall, this second base position doesn't have much value. I will add some value plays in my also consider bunch, but there's really not a ton. So it's definitely a position that unless you want to punt it, it's probably going to be somewhat expensive. But you could also consider Brandon Lowe, Jonathan India, Emmanuel Valdez, and Abraham Toro Hernandez at this position. Moving to third base, we're going to look at Rafael Devers, who has been very up and down throughout the season, though he does draw home run potential every game. And he is starting to score some fantasy points and not strike out as much as he was, which definitely gives him some utility. His price has come down a little bit as a result of his bad play as well. But again, he does have home run potential every time he comes to bat. His batting average has been awful. But he is in play today. Alex Bregman is also in play for Houston. Now, he draws just as good a metrics as Devers does, and he's a little bit cheaper at $5,200. He's also hitting the ball better lately than Devers is, and he has home run potential, which he's been hitting a lot recently. Then we'll look at McMahon for Colorado. Now, he has been on a nice streak lately, and he's a little bit cheaper than the top two guys. He's been on the red for 6 straight games, and he's had 10 fantasy points or more in 4 of them. He's also had 8 of the last 10 games over 10 fantasy points, so he draws some great metrics here. And a good matchup, giving him some opportunity to have another good game. He also has some home run potential here. And then some value plays. We have Garcia for Kansas City. Now, he's very cheap, and he's not really a home run threat, but he definitely has a risky upside here as he's hitting the ball okay, and he draws good metrics for this particular matchup, and so I do like him from that perspective. And then we'll look at Jake Berger, who, if you go with the Chicago White stack, he's definitely a cheap option that you can throw in there that has home run potential. Just be aware that he's not a a big time hitter most of the time, but he definitely draws some good metrics here. Overall, third base is good with different options and different price ranges. It's a solid position, but it's not as deep as first base. But there's also some guys to consider here in Royce Lewis and Justin Turner. So overall, there's just good options across the price ranges. Maybe in the shortstops, we're going to look with Tim Anderson here, who is a core play for me. He draws some really nice metrics for this matchup. Despite the fact he hasn't hit a home run this season, he definitely has good hitting potential, and he is starting to hit the ball better. I like his upside, and he draws good metrics for this particular matchup. Corey Seager is also in play for Texas. Now, he's very similar in his metrics here, though his price makes him hard to roster as a result of his being almost $6,000. But the matchup is very good here, and I really like his upside as a result of that situation. Bobby Witt Jr. is also in play for Kansas City here, another guy that's a little bit overpriced. His batting average has been kind of suspect all season, but he has home run potential, and he's been hitting the ball better the last few games, so that definitely gives him some utility here. Some cheaper options, McLean for Cincinnati. He's got a nice home game here, and while he's been up and down throughout the season since he started, he has really good metrics for this matchup, and being at home definitely gives him some upside. And then Royce Lewis is also in play here for Minnesota, as he draws some really good metrics for this matchup. Though he is high risk, high reward, he's only played a handful of games so far this year, but he definitely draws some value play metrics. For shortstop, overall, this position is good, but expensive plays. The value guys are a little bit overpriced and somewhat risky, but they are in play at this position. So, moving into the outfielders, we're going to start with Bryce Harper and Jordan Alvarez. Both these guys are my top tier core plays for this particular matchup. Fraley and Yelich are also at play in this position, as Fraley draws really good matchup metrics at home, and he has a great situation. Plus, he's hitting the ball well last 2 games against Milwaukee here, so I do like his upside, and he has home run potential. He's really good at home. Yelich also playing in Cincinnati, has really good metrics for this game. In the 2 games he's been here, he's had 2 good fantasy point games, and he's been pretty hitting the ball better lately, so that gives him some good upside. Then we'll look at Lane Thomas as a value play, and borderline value play, but he definitely has good metrics here. And if you stack a Washington right-handed stack, he's definitely a guy that has good potential in this matchup. And then we'll look at MJ Melendez for Kansas City. He draws good metrics for this matchup, though he hasn't hit the ball well this season. He has home run potential here, and that's where the metrics are really coming from. And then Brandon Nimmo. For the Mets, he draws some really nice metrics for this game. Though he's not a home run hitter, really, he definitely does have good hitting potential, and he's hitting the ball well this season. Though he's had a couple games in a row that haven't been great, but he definitely draws good metrics for this matchup. Overall, outfield, it has a lot of overpriced options at this position. The value doesn't seem to feel that cheap or particularly favorable, but there are value plays and there are good, decent options. Overall, you could also consider Kyle Schwarber, Gabriel Arias, Britton Doyle, Josh Lowe, Stone Garrett, Tommy Pham, and Nick Castellanos. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.